Welcome to the Rock and Roll Show podcast. We're here to share the magic of experiencing live music together with strangers and friends, and to get to know our guests a little bit better through their concert experiences. I'm your host, Alex Gadd, and I do this because I love talking about live music and concerts with people. Finding out what bands someone likes, what shows they've been to, allows us to get to know and understand one another a little bit better. And hey, I just love swapping stories about the shows we've seen over the years. Today, I'm happy to welcome Steve Berkwitz to the podcast. He's now Dr. Stephen Berkwitz, head of the Language, Cultures, and Religions Department at Missouri State University. Steve and I were roommates in college for 3 of our 4 years at the University of Vermont, which is why I'm wearing this ratty old 35-year-old t-shirt. And he was responsible for turning me on to a ton of music that I wasn't focused on before we met. He was also involved in the University Concert Bureau, the organization which booked all of the live performances on campus. So he was really the concert guy. We'll revisit some of those shows, some of the other shows that we caught together, and his history of concert going on today's episode. But for now, Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Alex. It's fun to be here. I'm excited to talk.
Me too. It's great to see you always, and we never get to see each other enough. So this is a pleasure. Thank you.
Agreed.
To start out with, how did you get your love of music? Because when I met you at 18, I guess, you were a passionate music guy. And so somewhere along the line, you got really into music. How did that happen for you?
Yeah, it's funny because I can't really credit that to my parents for my upbringing. It's not as if we always had music playing around the house. I was the oldest of 2 kids, so I didn't have an older sibling kind of turn me on to stuff like some people do. I think it had to do with back in the day when we were little, right? There was only, 4 or 5 TV stations you could watch. No smartphones, no internet. So we kind of had to keep ourselves entertained. And I was a latchkey kid. And so listening to music, I think, was one of the ways that I kept myself entertained. And also, I think I was influenced by random people I met and looked up to. So a good friend of mine when I was a little kid, and he was a year older than me, was into R&B, so I got turned on to funk music in the 70s and early 80s. Went on a van ride with some other teens, older teens, and to an Alateen conference or something, I think, in Western Wisconsin. And on the way, this is back in the day where you don't really have seat belts. You could just jump in the back of the van with the boombox and just go for a 4-hour drive on the highway and listen to classic rock music. So I got turned on to Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin in that experience. And so I think listening to music was always a way for me to connect with people. And so I just kind of developed that way, but it must have been something in me that got me into music because it wasn't really my family.
Yeah. So you sought it out. I think it's important to note for this conversation that you grew up in the suburbs of Minneapolis, and in the late 70s, early 80s, that was really a blossoming music scene of original musicians. So funk especially was not a standard thing. That had already kind of happened with Parliament Funkadelic nationally and then waned. But then certainly Prince and other bands in out of Minneapolis kind of brought it back.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah.
remember having a first favorite band?
Oh gosh, I almost have to say it was Prince. It doesn't sound super original because there was a lot of people who grew up in the Twin Cities that would probably say the same thing. But I remember listening to a local community radio station, KMOJ in North Minneapolis, which was run for the predominantly Black community in that area. They played national music, of course, but they played a heavy dose of Prince and The Time and other groups that were kind of in Prince's orbit. And I just remember listening to it, being blown away, getting Controversy, the album when it came out, and just thinking, wow, this is something really special. You don't hear
Right.
this kind of music just anywhere.
It was definitely different than all the other things that were on the radio. Even the disco that was coming out was nowhere near what Prince and his crew were doing. That leads into your first concert.
Yeah, so the first concert I went to, I would have been about 14, I think. I was in 8th grade. I went with a friend of mine to the old Met Center in Bloomington, Minnesota to see Prince, and this was the 1999 tour.
So
It's the
82.
Yeah, somewhere around
Yeah.
there, 82, 83. I can't really
Hmm.
remember. And so that was the first concert I went to. These 2 little, white kids dropped off in the big ice hockey arena to converted for Prince's show, and I don't remember a whole lot about it. I just remember being pretty impressed by it and loved the music. I had listened to the record by the time I went to see the show, so I knew the songs. It was amazing, but that was probably feel pretty good about having that be my first concert experience.
As first concerts go, that's pretty amazing. I remember the first couple of concerts I saw. I can't remember a ton of specific concert moments. I just remember the overwhelming feel of excitement and joy from being there because it was a lot and it was a long time ago.
Yeah, electric with all the people, and there's
Yeah,
something really unique about that experience.
very nice. So that leads you into high school. Did you start going to more shows in high school?
I didn't see very many live shows in high school. I listened to a lot of music, bought a lot of LPs, but I didn't go to too many. I think there was a couple times where I may have taken someone on a date. I remember going to see Arlo Guthrie at a theater, which was kind of fun.
Wasn't there a Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis?
Yeah, yeah,
But you
no
didn't see him
relation.
there. That would have been amazing if you had seen
It
him
would have
there.
been That would have been something. Yeah, no relation. So I saw a few, but not many. And at this time, a fair amount of me was being held at nightclubs and bars, and I was too young to get into those. But
Sure.
I did see a few, but not a whole lot of concert yet. That
Mhm.
comes later, probably when I get to be 18, 19, 20. And then when we meet up in Vermont, and that was sort of the heyday, I think, of my concert going experiences.
Let's jump into that then. So you show up. I feel like at that point I had seen probably, I don't know, 30 concerts and they were all major bands. And I was feeling pretty into it. Like I was a big time rock and roll guy. But once I met you, I learned I was such a mainstream rock and roller and you had such a broader musical base of interests. And you turned me on to so many things. And I remember Nazareth, old Alice Cooper, and that hard rock from the early 70s, and the funk stuff that was coming out of Minneapolis, and the alternative stuff that was coming out of Minneapolis, the Soul Asylums and Husker Du, which was Bob Mould, and other things from that time. And I was just so impressed that you had such a broad base of interests, whereas mine were so much like everything that was on what was still rock radio. It wasn't quite classic rock radio yet.
Wow.
And the other thing I was really interested in is you came with a pretty clear idea of what you wanted to do. You came as a comparative religions major, and you now are chairman of a department at a major state university. And yet you also had this really like hard rock and heavy metal side and the funk and the girls metal bands that you were into. Where did all these things, can you dive into a little bit more how all those
Yeah.
different flavors got into your soup?
Yeah. And to be honest, it's going to be hard for me because this was so long ago. But I think part of it was just being hungry to learn about as much music as I could. I think that's part of my DNA is that when I find something I like, I throw myself in and I try and learn it as much as I can about the subject inside and out. I remember I became a record collector when I was pretty young, and I think it was Rolling Stone. They had a really comprehensive guide for all the major and even minor artists and the rankings, ratings of all of the albums and the date and the name. And so I studied that and I thought, okay, this is a highly rated album by the Moody Blues. I better get it. I'm going to check it out and listen to it. And so I did that for a while when I was still really listening to classic rock, and the world of alternative music really hadn't penetrated my consciousness yet. I think part of growing up when we did, we were kind of bombarded by boomer music, right?
Like,
If classic rock, and there wasn't much else if you wanted to listen to rock music. But then, yeah, I started to find out about these other bands that way. But then also, I think paying attention to local newspapers that talked about alternative music and just trying to learn as much as I could because I wanted to be knowledgeable and exposed to new things and music that I would have a chance of really liking.
seemed that way to me. I thought to myself, I remember I had made a joke to someone. He's a comparative religions major and he's a comparative music major too, because he knows this. And it felt like that was the same mindset that you were interested in learning about all the religion and all the different types of music. And that turned me on and forced me to open my ears and seek out different things. So let me publicly thank you for
Yeah,
something that you did for
thank
me
you. That's very kind. You're
many
welcome, and I
years
appreciate
ago.
that's a very astute observation. I'd not put those 2 things together, but I think you're
Oh,
spot on with it.
that's good. That leads right into getting into the concert bureau. So at UVM, the concert bureau ran all of the production, booking, everything involved with putting on any type of concert anywhere in the facilities of the campus. And the important thing to note there that the campus held some of the largest venues in the state of Vermont. Our gym was the largest concert venue in the state of Vermont at the time. I don't know if it
Yeah,
still is.
pretty
So
astounding.
you got involved in the concert bureau freshman year as your primary extracurricular activity. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's really my only extracurricular activity. I did it during, my time at UVM. But yeah, I saw that and I thought, "Yeah, this is the thing I wanna do," and I dove in, really enjoyed that. It was a good experience for the most part.
Sure. And it opened you up to seeing more concerts.
Yep, I had a kind of almost semi-professional obligation, right, to be able to go out and check out bands and see how other people were staging shows.
Right. Do you remember the first show that you put on at UVM?
Yeah, this was shortly after I had to be interviewed by the current members of the concert bureau, and then I was asked to join, and not long after, we held a concert by INXS
Mm-hmm.
in the Patrick Gymnasium on campus, and so that was my first kind of experience behind the scenes at a show, and I was a fairly low level kind of runner, someone who was putting the little, chips of wood underneath the risers so the stage was even. It was a pretty crappy stage at the time. It was exciting, as fun as it is to be in the audience at a concert, to be backstage, at least at that age, at about 18, was
Right.
pretty cool, and INXS was a big band then, and so that was fun to be a part of that.
Yeah, I was amazed that we were able to pull in excess. That was, I think, on their Kick tour, which was their
Yeah,
biggest record ever. That was an amazing show, and I didn't even like in excess that much.
yeah, me neither, but it was fun.
It was fun, and thank you again for all of the access you provided for me. You also put on much cooler small shows. I remember there was a show, maybe freshman year, that you asked me to crew on, which was in the chapel, and that was Yarma Kaukinen and Rick Danko and Jonathan Edwards did 3 solo sets. I thought that was a brilliant show.
Yeah, that was fun. That was fun, and I don't know exactly how that was put together. I imagine they were touring together or something at the time,
Yeah, I
but
always wondered that. I wondered if your team packaged that up or if they were on a tour doing 3 solo sets together.
I wanna say that they were touring together, I
Hmm.
think. Again, a long time ago, but regardless, that was a neat show and all talented musicians and songwriters, and yeah, that was fun, and the Ira Allen Chapel on the UVM campus was a neat place to see a show, very intimate and good acoustics, so that was fun as well.
They also had a smaller auditorium in town called the Memorial Auditorium that I saw Meatloaf, I saw the Hooters, I saw all the 80s
Yeah,
second
we saw
tier
some shows
bands.
there together, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, we saw a bunch of shows there. But then
Anatar and Robert Cray.
Robert Cray, oh, that was a great show. I just saw him a couple years ago. Did you see shows when you went home then during the first
Yeah.
2 years of school?
Yeah, I did. I saw a lot of shows when I went home to Minneapolis and
Yeah.
in the summertime, but also during like school breaks. And at that point, I had made my conversion away from classic rock to alternative. And so I
Uh-huh.
wanted to see the bands that were playing at places like First Avenue, a place called the Caboose in Minneapolis. And then there were the smaller theaters like the Guthrie or the
Yeah.
Orpheum, and some places they've either closed or moved, or places that don't really exist anymore. So I was interested in doing that, but I also pretty early on, probably after my freshman year, I got a gig as a kind of volunteer intern with one of the local promoters in Minneapolis, a guy named Rand Levy, who used to run a company called Rose Productions. And so he was one of the two big promoters that got all the major bands that went through the Twin Cities. And so I got experience with a professional concert promoter working on various shows and festivals during the summers of my college experience, where I was pretty keenly interested in becoming a concert promoter one day.
Interesting. I didn't know that part of it, that last part. Do you have any interesting stories that you can share from that time of being backstage at bigger productions and festival type shows that had multiple bands playing?
Oh, yeah. I think it's funny because I looked through my scrapbook with ticket stubs and I come across so many shows I just can't even remember being.
Me too. I have shows from I moved to your hometown right when you were leaving to go to graduate school in California, and I saw every show that I could get a ticket to at First Avenue because I loved First Avenue. And now I have ticket stubs from shows, and I thought I went to see Meat Puppets? Really?
I was way
No
there.
memory at all.
Yeah, that kind of happens. I think from that, I remember a lot of it was just learning to navigate the music industry, or at least that slice of the music industry, and the personalities and whatnot. I worked at something that was called Riverfest, which was a summer 10 or 12-day all-day festival on Harriet Island in St. Paul and the Mississippi River, multi-stage festival, all the, food and all that type of stuff. Um, some really good bands and performers, some kind of not so good ones, but there was the most memorable event connected with that, I think, was when another band that I'm not crazy about, REO Speedwagon, was playing the main stage at Riverfest one evening. And there was a lot of drama because the weather forecast had this severe thunderstorm was going to come into the Twin Cities and pour down a bunch of rain, and there'd be lightning and thunder and all of that. And this was going to happen right around the time when the headliner, REO Speedwagon, was supposed to take the main stage. And so I remember being in, gosh, it must have been a trailer with lead promoters, actually maybe the second in command, who was on a walkie-talkie talking with the stage manager at the time, saying, we have to cancel the show. You have to pull them off. We can't go on. There's going to be a huge storm coming in. This is a safety hazard. For whatever reason, I never actually asked the guy. The stage manager refused. He just stood down and said, nope, we're going to go on. And they were going back and forth in this argument. And I was just a little intern minion just thinking, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And the sky was getting dark, and I think there was some kind of nervous energy in the crowd and whatnot. But lo and behold, we refused to pull the show. And just like minutes before they were supposed to hit the stage, the sky parted and cleared. And there was a kind of weird purplish glow in the
Uh-huh.
sky. And then the band came out and went right into riding the storm out. And it was just like this magical moment
Mhm.
that I think everyone in the audience loved. But had they heard the arguments about whether or not the show was even going to take place, it would have made it even more special.
Yeah, that stage manager lucked out for sure.
Yeah, he did.
Do you have a band that you've seen the most in your life?
Oh gosh, probably, again, this is partly a factor of where I grew up, but probably Soul Asylum. I
Mm.
saw them a bunch. They were just becoming big when I discovered them. They were with a local record company, and then they went national, and they
Right.
are just trailing behind the Replacements and Husker Du, but they were
Hmm.
supposedly the next big thing. And they turned out to be the next big thing coming out of Minneapolis for that grunge
Right.
rock scene.
I remember when you got to school, the first record you shared with me of theirs was Hang Time.
Uh,
And then when I
Sold
was a
out.
DJ at the college radio station, they released And the Horse They Rode In On. And that's the show we drove to New York City while
Yeah.
we were our senior year and saw them with Driving and Crying from Atlanta opening, one of the best shows I ever saw.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
That was a good one. Soul Asylum is, again, it's easily explainable. You lived where they played. They were on the way up, so they were playing a lot and getting a lot of exposure.
Yeah, I saw them a ton. I have a bunch of I can't remember all the shows, but I have a ton of ticket stubs from seeing their shows and
Sure.
places like First Avenue, and they would sometimes play with members of other bands and kind
Mhm.
of ad hoc shows that would come together. So that was fun. I think they even played in didn't they play in Burlington once when we were there? Maybe not.
No, I don't think so. The Replacements played in Burlington right before
Oh,
you went away. They played at the Memorial
we were there.
the spring semester before you went away for junior year. And
Okay.
I think we went to see that together.
I bet we did.
I'm
Yeah,
pretty
yeah,
sure we did because I was there and just have always assumed you were with me because you introduced me to the Replacements too.
yeah. Yeah, no, that was a good show too.
That's
Yeah,
good.
I saw them. I've seen Alice Cooper a lot. That
Hmm.
was I had friends that I grew up with who were big Alice Cooper fans, and this was the older stuff, and by the time I was old enough to see him, he was in his kinda, like, shock metal stage, and some of it was a yeah, it wasn't all that great. It wasn't a good
Right.
time really for hard rock, but he would play some of his old stuff, and he would do the same theatrics, so I always
Right.
enjoyed seeing Alice Cooper play, that was fun.
Right on.
I also saw a band called the Lunatics a lot.
I
They were
remember you introduced me to them too, and I thought, who the hell are the Lunatics? What a great name, yet I don't understand.
they were a great band, all female kind of punk rock band from New
Right.
York. Different though from a lot of the other sort of all female bands, and they were very intentionally subversive, and
Yeah.
they made themselves look as ugly as possible.
Right. They were making smarter music than the Vixens of the world.
Yeah, and the message was always their own, and so
Yeah.
they didn't become huge, but still a kind of respected band in that lineage of female musicians, or
Right.
more generally, that kind of punk rock era from on this side of the ocean.
Did you, doing all of these shows backstage, did you ever spend any time with any of the artists? Did you have any exposure to them other than just passing by?
Yeah, not really. I was always felt funny. I didn't want to be, I felt like I had to maintain some kind of professional decorum and not be a fan and kind of go up,
Right.
and we didn't have cell phones to take pictures with them at the time. So that probably made it a little easier, but not a lot. I saw them. I remember seeing Elvis Costello when he was
Right.
getting ready for sound check in Burlington at the gymnasium. So that was neat, but I didn't talk to him.
I was curious if maybe it was interesting to have a conversation with an artist that was actually about their show instead of a fawning fan conversation.
Yeah, it would have been,
How
but
about with tour managers? I'm sure you interacted with a lot of them.
yeah, probably more with stage managers and tour managers and things
Mhm.
like that. And sometimes they were really cool, and other times they were really awful. And that INXS show, I have one of my vivid memories is their stage manager was a major jerk. And he was just cussing out students,
Yeah.
our group were putting on this stage, and clearly a kind of attempt to put us in our place. I thought that was lousy, but not long after, the tour manager for Elvis Costello turned out to be this great guy, and
Right.
I took him out on a tour, not really a tour, but I got a van. He wanted to go see a log cabin. He wanted to buy a log cabin and have it like shipped to England. I don't know if he ever did, but and it rode around in the roads and outside of Burlington, Vermont, talking with him. And so that was fun because here's a guy who was experienced, was making a living in touring, and but he wasn't so hung up about his status or his importance. So he was someone I could actually have a conversation with.
Did you have any weird concert rider situations. The famous story is always that Van Halen insisted on no brown M&Ms, and they did that to make sure that the promoters read the whole rider. And so they could walk in, and if they saw a brown M&M in the M&M bowl, they would know that no one had checked the electrical circuitry and setup.
Yeah. And that makes sense, actually. That was really smart of them to do that.
Yeah, genius.
I don't really recall. I think the INXS guy got upset because there was something missing from the catering, or I
Yeah.
recall now, but that wasn't something that I paid a lot of close attention to for whatever reason.
So then you go off to Edinburgh for the year, our junior year. Did you see different kind of music there? I know you came back with some new music to share with me that you had gotten exposed to. Did you see any bands while you were over there?
Yeah, I saw a bunch of bands. I sought out one of the local promoters at Edinburgh, and the guy met with me, and it was nice. And he didn't really have any work to offer me, but he did hook me up with some shows. And so I saw some established acts. I saw Heart. I saw Yes, although I can't remember if the life of me.
That's funny.
So obviously it didn't leave much of an impression on me. I remember seeing Maria McKee
Oh,
there.
nice.
She was fantastic, great
Yeah.
voice. Saw Van Morrison at a cool theater. That was really cool. Roy Harper,
Yeah.
folk musician, was good. One of my favorites, I saw Faith No More in a tiny little rock club called The Venue in Edinburgh. And maybe 500 people could see them. And so
Yeah.
this was new and they were just getting big. That was fun. Red Hot Chili Peppers put on an amazing show in a little club in Edinburgh that I have vivid memories of.
Because that would have been on the Mother's Milk
Yeah,
tour,
yeah, great
the
album.
Higher Ground single that they were playing.
Yeah, and they were
Yeah.
still pretty. They hadn't quite become an established act yet.
Yeah. It
They
was
were
the
really
next record was really the one that put them over the top. So you came back, and I remember the day you came back to school. I was living up there full time by then, and I picked you up at the airport, and it may have even been your birthday.
okay. Around this
And
time.
as I was pulling out to go get you at the airport, I heard over the radio that Stevie Ray Vaughan had just died in an helicopter crash the night before.
Oh, wow.
And so it's one of the few events in my life where I know exactly where I was because I was in the driveway of our apartment
Okay.
leaving to go get you for the airport. I was taken aback. I had to stop the car. And
Mm.
then you came back, and I remember there was a concert that had been booked that was poorly thought through right when you got back to school. And you were now the co-head of the concert bureau for your senior year.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I was all excited and I was probably had an overinflated sense of importance. I was what, 21-year-old experienced concert guy and coming back from Europe and thinking, okay, now I'm going to really have big ideas and plans to have a great year putting concerts on in Burlington at UVM. But I had gotten back and my predecessors had been convinced by our booking agent to book Little Feat, which was a popular band at the time in our university, but they booked them 1 week after school started in the gym. And so we didn't have time to sell tickets. People were just getting back to campus and we lost our shirts on the show. And I was livid because that cut into all the other kinds of performances we could hold in our senior year. And I think the concert was good. Little Feat was fine.
They were great.
But yeah, we spent too much money on it. We didn't make enough money back. And I felt that we got taken advantage of by our booking agent. And so we had a split with that guy for a while. And he turned around and we found out he was trying to blacklist us and not get anyone else to work with us. And so this was all this experiences where I'm like, the music industry might not be a really good career for me.
Yeah, you really have to be able to stomach a lot of sleaze.
Yeah, that was a big disappointment. Again, behind the scenes,
Sure.
'cause the show was good, but that really limited what we were able to do as a student organization in terms of staging live music.
And you would come back with all these big dreams of what you were going to help the organization do,
Oh,
and I'm
yeah.
sure that that must have been really, I remember that being frustrating for you.
Yeah, it was very
However,
frustrating.
that did turn into what I think was the best show you ever put on. And whether you did it out of necessity because you couldn't put on a bigger show in the spring, talk about the Shawn Colvin concert at the chapel.
I agree with you. I think that was my favorite show from our time at Vermont when I was on the concert bureau.
Hmm.
Because there was a lot of shows. We used to put on four
Hmm.
major concerts a year, but because we lost so much money on Little Feat, we had to reorganize again, and booking agents weren't going to work with us. We had to come up with something else. And I remember one of the other students in the group approached me with an idea about having a benefit concert for Women's History Month. That sounds great. Why don't you look for some artists who we could get? And I don't know, I can't remember where she got this information, but she did some research and we were looking at various artists. And on that list was Shawn Colvin,
Hmm.
who no one had really heard of.
Her first record had just come out.
Right. And it was like maybe $5,000. It was just some ridiculously low price
Right.
to have her come and play for us. And so it seemed like this would be a good idea. We took a risk on it. I went to bat on the idea with the other people, and we decided we'd hold it in the chapel again. We booked her, and we arranged that the proceeds would go to the women's domestic violence shelter in Burlington. That was something we were going to do again, just to do something good, give back to the community, and emphasize the importance of the event and recognizing Women's History Month. And around that time, as we started to sell tickets, her album won a Grammy. And so people started paying attention to her, and it was a great album. And so I
Great.
remember we had a boombox in the lunch room or in the cafeteria, and we were playing her album for people to hear. And it was just a really fun, again, born out of necessity, but a fun show to put together in an unorthodox way. Good cause. It was her with a guitar and a microphone on the stage.
Right.
And it was
Her
amazing.
music really lent itself to that venue and that thing. And it
Yeah,
was packed.
yeah, yeah, and we didn't know at the time. We said, "We don't what else can we do? We'll try
Right.
this," and
Right.
it just turned out to be spectacularly successful, and I
Yeah.
really wish that the people that followed me continued that because that would have been just such a good idea to have an annual concert
Tradition.
people could look forward to. They didn't.
I remember seeing that show and I ran into our friends Ellen and Lisa, and we were all just gobsmacked by how good it was. It's really one of the highlight, not the best show I ever saw, but definitely top 10. And she told a funny story about running into Bob Dylan backstage at the Grammys and he was totally nodding in and out. Don't meet your heroes, basically. And I always remember that too.
She was fun. Yeah, then she after rousing applause and all of that, and she was trying to leave the stage for an encore, and I messed up and got the elevator all screwed up, so she couldn't get off the stage. And by the time I got on, she waved from me and said, "Okay." And so she never got to do the traditional leave the stage and
Right.
come back.
I like when people don't even bother. They do the encore just
You
by
know?
staying up there. That's how good she was.
Yeah. And at the end, she just like packed up her car and drove back, I think in Massachusetts somewhere.
Yeah.
Thanks,
God.
Sean. Great show.
Well, that's why it was $5,000 because she took it all.
Yeah, yeah.
But after that, that was pretty much the last show you put on, was it not?
UVM, yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
I think by that point, I had become a little disenchanted with the concert industry and decided I
Yeah.
wasn't going to try to pursue that as a
Right.
career. I had become interested in academics. Edinburgh gave me a taste of this kind of old-fashioned, cultured life of an academic, and that seemed kind of fun. So I didn't do any more shows after that. I went to shows,
Right.
but I didn't.
Let's talk about those. So after college, you were at home for a couple years. You went to Santa Barbara for graduate school. Were you seeing shows during that period?
I was. It's go down to LA a few times to see music and come back, but I was a halt. Santa Barbara got some shows, not a lot of shows that I wanted to see. Remember I saw Dishwalla, who I think were from Santa Barbara, in a little local bar once, and that was kinda cool. But, yeah, I didn't see as many, I think, at this point, and I was also pretty focused on graduate school and gaining the skills I would need to become a professor one day. I wasn't seeing as many, but I still saw some.
Hmm.
I went and saw PJ Harvey in LA, amazing, she's my all-time favorite performer. Saw Bob Mould's band Sugar put on a
Sugar,
great
yeah.
show. Lunatics down at the Roxy was one of the last shows I saw in LA. So that was fun.
We've talked a lot about the past. What was the most recent concert you went to?
I think the most recent one was heck in Soul Asylum, right? They're still playing. They played First Avenue, which again was the place I saw them the most. My favorite venue. A lot of memories there. And I went in large part because I wanted to bring my older daughter, Rashmi, who I guess she was 20. So she could go to First Avenue. I wanted to kind of introduce her to what First Avenue was like and go see this band I had seen so many times growing up. And it was fun. It's not her taste in music and it's kind of crowded, but it's a good experience. So I wanted to give that to my daughter, to something that she could experience for herself and gain some insight into what I spent a lot of time doing growing up when I was her
Right,
age.
especially since she didn't grow up in Minneapolis. She grew up
Correct.
in
In
Missouri.
Springfield, Missouri, which is very different and not as much live music here.
Do you have a most memorable concert you've ever seen?
It'd be hard to choose just one. Alice Cooper's show I saw in St. Paul with Guns N' Roses opening, and I didn't know who Guns N' Roses were. They were a complete unknown.
Isn't that the best? I usually ask that question because have you ever discovered a band just
Okay.
because they were the opening act? And
Yeah. Yeah, that was
that's the
for me,
ultimate
Guns N'
dream. You
Roses.
just hit the jackpot.
Yeah, that was like, wow. And then Alice Cooper was great. And my buddies and I tried to go back to the hotel, and we actually got on the elevator with Alice Cooper until his guys made us get off again. So we didn't get up to the after party, but there was this glimmer of hope maybe we could. That was a great show. Seeing Nirvana at First Avenue was amazing.
That is incredible.
That was being in the right place in the right time, and they were just getting popular with Nevermind. I
Was that after college when you first got home?
think so. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
must have
so.
been.
So that was amazing. The Lunatics and the 7th Street entry was a lot of fun.
Right. The 7th Street entry was the smaller club next to First Avenue.
Exactly. Yeah, where the smaller bands can play.
Right.
Gosh, there's so many that I've enjoyed.
Did you ever go to a show and just walk away completely deflated or disappointed because they underperformed?
Yeah, fortunately, not a lot. And I suppose when I look at my scrapbook and I see ticket stubs where I don't remember going, probably gives you some idea. I
Yeah.
think the most disappointed I was a Steve Winwood concert, and because my friends and I went, we were Traffic fans, but we wanted to hear him play Dear Mr. Fantasy, John
Yeah.
Barleycorn, and all these great, great old Traffic songs. And instead, it was Bring Me a Higher Love and
And
all these
yeah.
things. And we were surrounded by adults, and they had little hip flasks drinking whiskey, but they were seated. And it was just I think it was at the Met Center also. It was so boring.
That's exactly what I envisioned by asking this question. Ones where you love the band, but the band is not in the same space as you are.
Yeah, yeah. He sold a lot of records, but that later Steve Winwood kind of pop music just didn't do it for us. That was a pretty
Oh,
disappointing show.
I can imagine. For a couple minutes, I just want to dive into some music media. For people of our age, live album were, in my opinion, critical. Before MTV, when I wasn't old enough to go to concerts, the only way I got a sense of what my favorite bands actually sounded like live was to get a live album. The live album also served a dual purpose of being a greatest hits record. So I didn't have to buy the greatest hits record also. I could buy the live record. Did you have a favorite live record?
I remember I had a bunch of live records. I don't know that I appreciated them as much as you did, but what was it? Cheap Trick live at Budokan?
At Budokan, yeah.
Yeah,
That
at
was
Budokan.
one of the two most fundamental records in my upbringing.
Yeah, that was a pretty fun album. I remember that one
So
being good.
good.
You like that too?
Oh, loved. Great record. So fundamental. We were 9 when it came out. It was pop glam rock, but it was also a little grungy and dirty. And oh, it was fantastic.
A fun band.
Just the best.
Yeah, and I'm sure
So
there's
good.
I probably have had a few live Jimi Hendrix records that I listened to a lot and like.
Yeah. Once
Yeah.
the Hendrix estate started going through his archives and putting out stuff, there's some incredible stuff there. The problem is mostly that there's so much of it now,
Mm.
and it's all kind of the same. It's all great, but not one thing doesn't really stand out from the other. You can get the Woodstock record, you can get
Yeah.
the Monterey Pop record, there are a whole bunch of things that he did with that were all just incredible.
Mm.
But I have listened to them all, and they don't really stand out one from the other.
Now,
They're just all amazing.
when the economic interests come into play, people are just trying to put out as much stuff as they can, and inevitably means the quality starts to diminish. So,
Couldn't agree more. So let's talk about bucket list things. Is there a venue you haven't been to yet that you most want to go to see a show at?
it's funny. It really would be a bucket list, but I don't know if I'll ever be able to get there. But I'd kind of like to see someone play at the Hollywood Bowl in LA. I think that
Yeah,
would be fun.
that's something we could arrange.
When I was living out there, I drove past it, but I never saw a show there. But it would be neat to go and see someone in that atmosphere and that
Yes.
size of an arena. I'm kind of turned off by the really huge amphitheaters. I saw some other pretty disappointing shows at the Alpine Valley Amphitheater
Yeah,
and was,
Alpine Valley is like the classic Midwest
yeah,
large amphitheater.
yeah, like the Stones and the Dead. And I was just like, why am I here? I can't even see who's on stage.
Oh, hey, I was just at Life Stadium seeing the Stones, and I was just close enough that I could make out Mick wherever he was on stage.
Okay.
But you really do have to watch the show on a TV.
So maybe the Hollywood Bowl. Maybe if I keep an eye on who's coming through there and see if I can arrange it. But boy, that would be expensive to when you add everything up.
That's okay. I mean, what are you living for if not to go do things that are
True,
life affirming?
true.
If you could see a band that you have yet to see that's still out there performing, is there anyone you would like to see?
Well, there's probably a lot, but a band that I somehow missed during their heyday, and I'd love to see is Tool.
Mm-hmm.
So it must have been because I was in grad school and I was just not tuned in to that music very well, but I've kind of rediscovered Tool and think this is an amazing band and they would be
Amazing.
cool to see.
Well, they just had a tour last year, I think. So
Yeah,
I'm sure they'll go out again because they're rolling again as a
yeah,
band. It's
yeah.
exciting to watch.
One of those almost, Rush was the super group of the 70s. Tool may have been the super group of the 90s in terms of amazing
Yeah.
musicians.
Yeah, the musicianship is off the charts. And then do you have any tickets for upcoming concerts? Do you have any plans to go and see any shows this summer?
Oh gosh, not at the moment. I kind of look around and see who's coming. Occasionally we'll get someone to come through, but I'm usually not interested in seeing them. I try and see who's playing in Minneapolis when I go up and visit my family. And so
Right.
maybe I'll get a chance to see someone the next time I go back up there, but I don't have any tickets right now.
All right. Well, we'll have to wait a couple more years until your daughter's old enough to
There we go.
strike out on her own, and then I'll start coming out and we'll start going to see
There we
shows.
go. Well, I can meet you in Hollywood.
We should definitely do that. So, my last question is getting at the whole point of this podcast, which is what is it about live music that keeps drawing you back? Even if you're not going to see as many shows now as you used to, I know that if you could, you would.
Yeah, I mean, the experience of live music, it's taken a toll on my ears. I'm pretty close. I'm sure I'm going to be getting hearing aids here in the next few years, but I love still that there's nothing that can replace that experience of traveling to some venue with all sorts of other people, strangers. You get in a room together, the lights, the atmosphere. There's something really special, I think, about seeing artists perform music in front of you with a crowd of people who are as excited about it as you are. And it's this kind of magical electric feeling about being there that really difficult to replace. You can go to a sporting event and sometimes there are moments where there can be a really special thing that happens, but I think generally speaking, live music is something that's pretty unique when it comes to experiencing excitement and joy and wonder all at the same time.
I think that's really well said. I wish you many more concerts in your future, and
Thank
I
you.
thank you very much for being on the show.
It's been my pleasure, Alex. I've enjoyed. It's always good to see you, and it's fun to talk about live music.
Right on. I hope we get to see each other and talk more soon.
Yes.
And that's it for today's conversation. Thank you all for joining us. We'll be back next Tuesday. And if you like what you heard today, we'd appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe or follow to make sure you get notified about each new episode. And please tell your friend. Also, I have a new product note. We're going to release a playlist for every episode. So look for the Rock and Roll Show podcast playlist on both Apple Music and Spotify every week, featuring songs by the bands mentioned during each episode. So check that out. Additionally, we want to know what you think. Please leave us a comment and we'll respond to each one of them. The Rock and Roll Show podcast is a World Highway Media production. I'm your host, Alex Gadd, and until next time, remember that life is short, so get those concert tickets.